That to me is leadership. I was told by an individual that I didn't have leadership. Well, I said, you have a different style. There are different styles of leadership. But real leadership does not get way in front of its people. It influences its people and tries to bring them to the place that they'll make a decision that this is their decision.
Now, that also works in the church.
Yes.
For a pastor working in a church. And so what you're saying is they would go forth, they'd work with their deacons, they'd know their people where they're at, and work it all the way down in that level.
Yes. For example, in every local church there's a leadership structure. And they're the movers and shakers. The smart pastor finds out who they are. And he gently, quietly makes suggestions to them. They in turn will suggest to others. And then when a decision is made,
smooth,
everybody's on board.
Yeah. So you can see that problem, that weakness with pastors being able to deal with that. That's often what happens from time to time, not identifying that when one goes into a situation. And so you can see that all the way down.
And by the way, a real leader does not take, in my opinion, he does not, or she does not take criticism and disagreement personally. You do not want everybody in the room saying yes. I was really blessed during my years as the executive secretary because of moderators like Jackson and Hampton. They were thinkers. Well, Cheshire as well.
Yeah.
But there was a man on our committee named Jack Ritchie. He was a stickler for procedure. And he often would tell me, preacher, if you can get it by me, you won't have any trouble on the floor. What he did is make me make sure that what I was presenting was correct.
Right.
By the way, I think that good leadership also provides all the information that's necessary. When I was executive secretary, for example, when I got a letter, I included in my exec committee notebook. We had sometimes 125 pages. In other words, what I knew, they knew. And on any issue, when they made a decision, they knew everything I knew. Every letter I wrote, every letter I got, all the criticism, that way they can make an intelligent decision. We blame boards a lot of time for making decisions when they do not have the right information. I believe that's true even in a church. You need to put the facts on the table. You don't need to skew the facts. You don't need to have your own agenda. I honestly believe if it's right, you can get it passed.
Right, and that way people aren't surprised or feel betrayed later down the road. So.
And by the way, some things aren't worth fighting over.
Just let it go.
The color of carpet, what difference does that make to the preacher?
Right.
You want the people happy. You learn those things over the years, and you learn to be patient and allow time. God never gets in a hurry. And we make a lot of mistakes by getting in a hurry.
Now, you're kind of getting into stuff that pastors need to really think about.
Well, let me give you an illustration.
Okay.
The first time, I have 5 donkeys. The first time we trimmed the little male's hoofs, he kicked, he reared, he would not allow you to trim his feet. And I was frustrated. I said, what in the world are we going to do? The farrier said, just be patient. He tied him, he laid down, he kicked. In 45 minutes, by the clock, that farrier went over, untied Pee-wee's feet, told Pee-wee to stand up. Pee-wee stood up, lift your foot, he lifted that foot. Pee-wee had surrendered. He says if you'll give them time, they will go right where you want them to go.
And that works with donkeys in church.
It'll work in church. You be patient.
Yeah. And just wait.
Sometimes at a business meeting, you couldn't get anything passed. A man may have had a problem with his family. A man may be sick. The next meeting, you could burn the building. Same people. You've got to know when it is time to act and not act. Don't rush people.
That's good. What other advice would you give to folks pastoring in leadership positions?
Well, now, for leaders, let me suggest to you that the most important thing for a leader is to maintain his integrity and his character. He ought to be what he is. He ought not to have a hidden agenda. He ought not try to coerce or manipulate people. He ought to be a genuine person. That's what people look for, someone who is genuine. When it comes to a pastor, I would suggest that the same thing is true, but I would add that he ought to give great emphasis to maintaining his personal relationship with God, in the sense of keeping his devotions up, staying in touch with God, and being a man of the Word, that when he stands, he speaks God's Word. He ought not get sidetracked on issues. He ought not let others set the agenda. He needs to set his agenda by God's book. Heard a fellow say at the National, and you heard the same thing, I think, I don't understand how people 50 think. It's not important that I understand that. It's important I understand how God views people.
Right.
Now, if you view them from God's standpoint, you can minister to anybody at any age.
Right.
When people say that old folks can't minister to young folks, then you tell me how grandmamas and granddaddies have such an influence on their grandchildren.
That's right. And they do.
They do, absolutely, yes.
They do.
Yeah.
So, the character, the integrity, standing
honesty,
in the Word.
and I would say humility too. Do not. I've often said that many pastors and leaders have a much higher estimate of their value than their performance warrants. And the thing that characterized me, Dr. Johnson, for example, I never felt real comfortable around Dr. Johnson. He was, if he wasn't a college president, he looked like one. But he was a very humble and meek individual. And I think one of the things missing among preachers today and leaders is the humility. I'm not talking about false humility. I'm not talking about lack of confidence. I'm saying the fact that they recognize God has placed them where they are.